We are talking, of course, about London Bridge terror attack and all the developments since then. Let's speak now to the Justice Secretary for the Conservative Party, Robert Buckland. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Well, undoubtedly, people are talking about the terror attack as part of the election campaign. Your party in particular has been accused of politicising this issue. Are you politicising it? Are you using the death of two people, a terrible terror attack that put people in absolute fear for their lives on Friday, as a political weapon?
Certainly not. And first of all, remembering Saskia Jones and Jack Merritt is, I think, what we all need to do. And also all the people who were there and who might have witnessed this appalling crime, who will have been affected by this, and the acts of bravery that we have seen and pay tribute to. Now, what we're trying to do is to get the balance right, to remember that the first duty of government is to protect the public. And that's what we've been looking at over the weekend. My officials in my department have been working through the weekend to make sure, first of all, that the people who have committed terrorist offences, who are out on licence, are being supervised properly, and that if there is any issue relating to them, that swift action will be taken. And then also looking ahead to future release arrangements, and also the wider group of people who might not have committed terrorism offences, but who are people of concern within the system, who might have demonstrated some sort of extremist tendency. We're talking about a few hundred people in a population in prison of over 80,000, but these are people quite clearly who could pose a risk, as we tragically saw on Friday.
But
what we're doing.
Why did we have to wait for two promising young people trying to do good in the world to lose their lives, and other people face the terror of that knife man and the potential of a bomb, a suicide belt, which people didn't realise until later was a fake one, for you to start supervising these people properly? We already know they're not supervised properly because of huge cuts to the justice system, huge cuts to police, huge cuts to probation, huge cuts to the prison officer numbers, huge cuts to every aspect of supervision and help and to deal with these people. Why did we have to wait for two young people to die before you decided to take action?
No, we're not waiting for anything, and this is ongoing work, and it's wrong to say, and I think unfair to say, that because of issues with regard to funding in the system, that somehow there were failures. Each case is.
You're saying the money hasn't. You're saying that the lack of money in the system and the ongoing criticism of massive long delays and lack of money in the system, you're saying that's not responsible.
Well, we're looking at each individual case, but I can say that from the initial evidence that I've seen, these cases were all looked at a high level by people in the National Probation Service, in the police and the security services, and the work that is done jointly with those agencies is second to none. The reality is that we are dealing with a very difficult cohort of people, and there's been much discussion, I think proper discussion over the weekend, about the nature of terrorism, of terrorists, the way they behave. Are they like other criminals? Do they uniformly find a way to rehabilitation, or is it sometimes the case, tragically, that people harbour long and deep views and hatred, which superficially doesn't appear, but then manifests itself in horrific
I think
ways.
We know
These
the
are complex issues,
with
Julia,
all due respect,
not...
Mr. Buckland, I think we know the answer to that, and I think the families of the two young people who died know the answer to that. But you also knew the answer to that because your predecessor, Michael Gove, when he was Justice Secretary in 2015, he asked Ian Atchison, a former prison governor, to conduct an independent review of Islamist extremism in the prisons and probation system in England and Wales. And he says what he found was shocking. There were such serious deficiencies, he said, in every aspect of the management of terrorist offenders through the system. He predicted there would be problems, and no action was taken.
Well, and Ian Atchison's work has been very important, and
so
Ian
important
is somebody
that nothing was done
that's
as a
not
result.
right. Well, that's not right.
What did you do as a result?
Separation centres were established within the prison estate in order to try and deal with this issue. Training and enhanced training for over 24,000 prison staff has been delivered. Arrangements are in place to remove extremist literature, to vet people more appropriately who come into the prisons, and to deal with the threat of radicalisation.
It's not worked very well so far, has it?
Look, I think think these are very tough issues. Ian, I think, makes some important points. And as a result of that, I've instructed the Permanent Secretary in my department to look again at the recommendations in the review and to come back to me as quickly as possible with regard to how they're being satisfied and what more can be done. This is something I take incredibly seriously and have done in the few short months that I've been in office.
Well, I mean, Ian Atchison in his article says that most of the recommendations he made simply weren't put into place, and he said, and he says that there was just it's a dysfunctional organisation and action wasn't taken. That the fact that there are it was revealed by the Prime Minister yesterday, there were 74 convicted terrorists who were out on our streets on early release, despite being known to be terrorists. One of the 9 who'd been arrested, including Usman Khan, and convicted in 2012 for terrorist offences. Nazem Hussain, he has now been arrested on suspicion of preparing terrorist acts. Now, the fact that a day after a terrorist attack, that this man can be arrested on suspicion of preparing terrorist acts, suggests that if he had actually already been under a level of supervision that would have actually found that there was evidence. I mean, again, he hasn't been convicted of anything of this latest arrest charge, so we'll have to wait and see with that case. But the fact that there was enough evidence to even make that arrest suggests that he hasn't been supervised properly. So when I put to you, Mr. Buckland, that you had to wait for 2 young people to be killed before their action was taken, I was correct, wasn't I? Because if you hadn't waited for that, we wouldn't have known. Either this man would already have been arrested, or this man would never have been identified as someone who's preparing a terrorist act.
Well, look, Julia, I think it's easy for me to try and speculate as to what might or might not have happened. What is going on now is a thorough review into all these cases. And I can say that, looking at the list of restrictions on people's licences who have committed this sort of offence, they are lengthy and comprehensive, and that a lot of resource is put into regular meetings with these individuals.
Oh, well, that's worked well, hasn't it?
Supervised within the community. Look, I mean,
if you could have seen the faces of everyone in the studio when you just said that. Everyone just looked up and smiled at me. And I think that's the reaction of my listener right now. And I think that's the reaction of millions of people around this country who just do not accept this idea that we should be all nicey and try and be understanding about people who want to kill us on our streets.
Look, Julia, I'm not nicey about anything. I've probably met more criminals in my professional life than most justice secretaries, and I'm very clear-eyed about the type of person we're dealing with, which is why we want to take further action to detain terrorists in custody for longer, to keep them in prison for longer, to make sure that the public is protected to the highest degree, which is why the Prime Minister was absolutely right to talk about the action that has been taken and that we will take in order to protect the public. That has to be the first duty of government. That's what we are focusing on relentlessly. That's what my officials and I have spent the weekend doing, and that's what we're going to redouble our efforts to continue to do in the days ahead.
But ultimately, this is going to cost more money. You need to have more prison officers. You need to build more prisons, separate units. You need to have greater supervision. 23,000 people known to be a possible risk. We don't know which of those 23,000 could possibly end up being a risk to people in this country. Certainly 3,000 of serious concern to the security intelligence services. And those are the people who haven't already been convicted of serious terror offences. We know that the 74 currently out on our streets will be joined in the matter of months by many dozens more. What is the government going to do about that?
Well, in the first days of his premiership, Boris Johnson announced a 2.5 billion investment in prison places and also an extra 250 million into prison security and improvements in that. And we're going to be getting on with that in the months and years ahead. Clearly, as you say, resource is an issue, and it is now starting to be provided. And we have seen an increase in the number of prison officers. We are actively recruiting and increasing the number of probation officers fully trained to deal with this type of issue. And therefore, there's a real focus by this government and the Prime Minister and me on the criminal justice system and the importance of making sure that it works in a way that protects us all.
The reality is, though, a lot of those numbers that you're talking about, prison officers and probation officers, you're simply replacing people who've already lost. Just finally, Mr. Buckland, in terms of the comments that have been made over the weekend, and people are talking about politicising this. I mean, it seems to me it is a political issue. What are people going to do about it? Do you think it was wrong of many Conservatives to go out onto the television screens and radio in recent days and blame early release brought in by the Labour Party when your party has been in power for 9 years?
No, it wasn't. We were pointing out the chronology, the timeline of this. Automatic early release for this type of offence was introduced by Labour in 2008. We have taken action to end that. We introduced a new type of sentence in 2012 to replace sentences that were failing and that were being increasingly challenged within the courts. We have extended that sentence system, and indeed, before this appalling incident, we'd already announced measures to further end automatic early release at halfway for a whole range of serious and violent offences. So we've been ahead of the curve in making announcements on toughening up sentencing, and we're going to continue to bear down very hard indeed upon this particular aspect of sentencing.